What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Love and Rice Podcast with your host, Aunt Ma.
I'm your other host, Christina.
And if you guys are new to this podcast, make sure you guys subscribe and follow us on all podcast platforms. We are talking about Spotify, Amazon, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. And we're also on Instagram and TikTok. So make sure to give us some follows. Comment down below if you guys like this episode. Today, we are going to be talking about something pretty serious. Something just happened, to us in the last month. Over the weekend, it got pretty serious. Do you want to explain what happened?
Well, so this month, my grandma, she passed away. And she has been dealing with health issues for a while, and it's been kind of like a long journey and a long process for her. And I think she used to live at my parents' house for a while, so it's kind of seeing the transition of her moving there and kind of seeing her health deteriorate, and just always hearing about all these things that like my dad and parents had to do to try to take care of them. And then leading up to the point of, my family having to talk to us. And it was kind of weird because, like, when it came to death within the family, like, we never really had a talk about it too much. Like, within the Asian culture, it wasn't something that you would always just openly talk about. But this time around, I don't know, because we're all older, and it was my dad's mom that passed away. So, my dad, he's very closed off. Like, he doesn't really open up. He doesn't cry. Like, I don't think I've ever seen him cry.
That's true.
Yeah. And like, I guess my grandma was going through hospice because she was in a nursing home, and then she had to go to the hospital, all these things, right? It was very complicated, and they had to be doing all these things to take care of her, and she was kind of suffering at some point. And now, like, my parents are talking to me, and they're like, hey, can you guys come down to see your grandma? Like, she's ready to be taken off of the tubes, and like, she doesn't want to just be there and tied down, and she just wants to go home to be with grandpa for her last, like, I don't know, final days, right? And then the first thing my mom said when she called me, she was like, your dad doesn't want to talk to you guys about this, but like, he should. And I was like,
Why doesn't he want to?
because he's not very personal. Like, he's very private about things. So I think he doesn't know how to approach these type of situations. He doesn't know how to communicate his feelings.
Yeah, I would say death in Asian culture is pretty weird, right?
Yeah.
Our families are so different to where, like, you guys don't really talk about it, or you guys don't have as much death in your family, to where for me and my family, it's like I've been to a lot of funerals. I've had a lot of deaths. And so we talk about it a lot, right? Because I'm almost numb to this type of situation, right?
Yeah.
But for you, it's still pretty new. And so I guess it's crazy because, in this episode, we're going to be talking about how we bring up death to our kids. And right now you're talking about how in your middle-aged life, your elder parents still can't talk to you about death.
Yeah.
Right? Which is crazy.
Yeah. Like, they kind of did, but then we didn't really understand it to that extent. And then there was some kind of disconnect, right? Like, it wasn't as personal. Like, when they would tell you about it, it's like they try not to get emotional about it and stuff, right? But I think, like, with this one in particular, I don't know why, but it felt very personal. And
It's
for
your grandma.
yeah. But at the same time, I think even with my mom's mom, I don't even think that I was able to go to visit my grandma in the hospital, because like it was just so, I don't know, it was very complicated, and it was too late. But for this one, like, for them to call and say like, hey,
it's time.
It's time. You guys need to come home. Like, can you call your brothers and sisters and talk to them and try to figure out a way to like plan a trip to come down to see your grandma?
That was interesting that your parents had you organize all that not being the oldest. You're the middle child.
Right. I
You
think
still have two older brothers who, why didn't they go to them to organize that?
I think because I'm the oldest daughter,
Uh huh.
so it kind of makes more sense, right?
Does
Because
it?
it's like, because then I can communicate it with them in a way that makes it, it's
Oh,
like,
you can say it in a way where it's just more easy, and I would say like better to hear it from a girl, I
yeah, so
guess.
because I can have like more of a gentle approach and also like a realistic approach with like
That's true.
kind of letting everyone know, like, hey, your grandma's gonna be in hospice. She only has a few days to live. So we need to, as a family, make that trip, like, no
Yeah.
matter how busy we are, to come down and see her.
Yeah, that's definitely when life stops and you have to go see the person you love for the last few days.
Yeah.
Um, so with all this going on, it's like, were you thinking about our kids and what to tell them since we got to make an urgent trip?
Yeah, like it was kind of hard for me to figure out like how to talk to the kids because like we've talked about this before, but with our daughter Leia, she is 6 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and for I don't know this past year, like all she's talking about is like death and not wanting to die and wanting us to live forever and talking about heaven and asking me all these things.
Wait, what is she? What do you mean she's talking about death? Like in her understanding and at her level, in what way is she comprehending that and talking to you about that before any of this even happened?
Yeah. I think because she's always
Like, how does she even know about what's possible in death?
well, so I guess they would always ask me before about like my god brother who passed away.
Oh,
Yeah, and they're like, "Oh, so I guess they would ask because I would have pictures of him like just up somewhere, or they'll see my phone and they're like, "Oh, who's that?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's Uncle Vic." And then they're just like, "Oh, where is he?" And I would just be like, "Oh, well, he's not here anymore. He's in heaven."
mm.
And that's kind of where it all started.
How old was she when she started asking those
I
questions?
think it was just maybe a year or two ago.
Okay, so at
Yeah.
5.
Yeah, so it wasn't I didn't go to the extent of that, but I was trying to get her to understand like, oh, this is kind of what happens. And they asked like, "Oh, why is he in heaven? What happened to him?" And I had to explain like, "Oh, he was really sick." And then they're like, "Why was he sick? How come they couldn't cure him or fix him?" And I'm like, "Sometimes people just get sick and then you just can't get better."
That's something really hard for kids to understand because every time something is wrong with kids, as parents, we always find a solution to help them.
Right.
So they always think things will get better, things are fixable, right? So it's hard for them
Right.
to understand, like, what? What do you mean nothing can be fixed?
Yeah, because they're like, if they're sick, why can't you just help them to get better? Because every time we get sick, you guys give us medicine, take us to the doctor and the hospital, and then we're good to go.
Well,
Like,
we're obviously talking about a different type of sick, right? Like
exactly.
conditions,
Mm-hmm.
diseases, things like that. And I don't even know how to bring that up to the kids where it's like, no, it's not a cold, right?
Yeah.
It's something that's more deadly. But it's like, we've never really discussed the differences to
Yeah.
them.
Well, I mean, I kind of did. Like, with his specific situation, I'm like, well, he was sick, but he didn't just get sick. He was born sick. Like, he had
Right.
problems, like, with his heart, and trying to kind of explain that sometimes people are born with certain health issues that they have to live with the rest of their lives. Because sometimes they'll see people, like when I'm taking Leia to school, it was recently, maybe a month ago, and then she saw someone that was kind of like having a very hard time walking. He was like a
Mhm.
middle-aged person, and he's just like struggling, right? And I had to tell her, I'm like, hey, this is probably something he was born with, and it was like a condition with like his muscles and stuff, where
Mhm.
that's just how he is. And it's not that he's sick, but he's not like well and healthy, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So it's like they're starting to notice these things and they're starting to ask about these things. So I didn't really say anything to the kids, and I know we're trying to talk about how we're gonna kind of let them know why we're gonna see grandma. But even I think when it came down to it, when we actually went down, we're like, hey, we're gonna go visit great grandma because she's home. We want to just see her. And I think that was all that we said.
I think in my mind, it was that because I've been through all those situations of grandmas, great grandmas passing away, and older relatives. And um, at the age of in elementary school, I never really understood those things. And I think my parents would keep me away from those funerals at that time unless it
Mm-hmm.
was like a very close, immediate family member.
Yeah.
And so, now as a middle-aged man, when I think back about the people that I've saw on their last days, when I was a kid, I was traumatized. I was like, oh my gosh, this is scary. I never want to go to a hospital again. It was the freakiest thing ever. Every time I go to a hospital, I just get the creeps, right?
Yeah.
And, you see people with the tubes in their mouths and noses and all these old people. There's people next door groaning and moaning because they're in pain. Like, it sucks, right? I've seen people gasping for air on their last days, and it's just not the nicest sound you'll ever hear. And so it's always been traumatizing to me, right?
Yeah.
But as a middle-aged man, when I think about it, I'm like, oh, it was nice I got to see them at least once. Knowing that I saw my great grandma once in my life and I remember that part, it makes me feel whole
Yeah.
and complete, right? When I don't see someone, I'm like, have I ever met them? I've never met them before, and they're our family member. That's where I feel like there's a hole in my heart, right?
Right.
So it's like when we were discussing, should the kids come? Should we have my parents babysit while we deal with this family matter?
Mm-hmm.
And we said, well, I think it's good for the kids to visit your grandma, which
Yeah.
is their great grandma, to know that they at least know that they've met her once,
Yes.
right? Because even though they don't know what's going on right now and they don't understand the death, and we don't want to scare them, in like 5 years or 10 years, they might be like, hey, who was that lady that we met?
Mm-hmm.
That old lady,
Well,
and we tell them, they're like, oh, cool.
yeah. So I mean, the kids have seen great grandma like a few times, but at that point already, when they saw her, she was like her health was already declining.
Well, the kids were like 2 years old and
Yeah.
3 years old, so they don't even remember her. You know what I mean? But now that they're older, they will always remember the old lady that they saw in the bed.
Yeah, because for me, it's like I didn't get to see my grandma and grandpa before they passed away. So for me, I'm like, I have that hole in my heart, like you're saying, like I wish I could have gone to visit them, but because it was so sudden, like there wasn't a chance for me to go and see them. So that's why I think when it came down to it, I'm like, I think it's really important for the kids to see her. They don't have to necessarily know that she's in her deathbed, but for them
Yeah.
to just be able to see her and have that memory of her, I think that's important. And, my brothers, they have their families as well. And, like while we had our conversations on the side, like I had a group text with them as well, and we're like, hey, we're trying to figure things out, and I'm asking them, I'm like, are you bringing the kids over? Like, what have you told them? Should we all go together? Like, to what extent do we let them know like the situation, or do we just all go and let them like see grandma and just kind of go with the flow, right? So I think that was like a big concern for all of us. But I saw that each family had different approaches, and that the way that the kids received the situation was very different.
So we took our kids to see your grandma in the bed, right, on her last days, and she was pretty much sleeping and snoring. And
Yeah, because she was
and-
tired,
and Leia would grab her arm and like kind of caress her arm and kind of comfort her. And she'd be like, oh, she's so tired. And she would want to stay by the bed the entire time, which was pretty cool for me to see that. I didn't expect that from her.
Me neither,
You know.
because Enzo, he's 4, and he was just staring at her. He's just like, okay,
Yeah,
right?
like, what's
Like he was
going
only there
on?
for a little bit because he's so
Yeah.
young. He doesn't understand it at all. And then I'm standing there with my grandma the whole time and just holding her hand. And you know
Yeah.
what it is? I think because she sees that I'm doing it, and I'm standing there and I'm holding her and trying to talk to her and like rub her arm, get her comfortable.
Yeah.
And then Leia started doing the same thing. And my cousin, she made like a little stuffed animal bear. It's kind of like a Build-A-Bear, But then she put her voice in it, and it was like saying, "Oh, it's okay. We love you, Grandma." Da, 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 da. And then Leia kept getting the bear, and she kept putting it in front of my grandma's ear to try to like let her listen to it. And she kept playing it and pushing it, and she was trying to play with my grandma, you know. And I was just like, "Whoa!" Like she I think she understood that maybe she wasn't well.
She wanted your grandma to feel
She
better,
wanted her to
so
feel
she was trying
better.
to make her play with the stuffed animal.
Yeah.
And and it's funny because she was analyzing everything, right? She's like,
Mhm.
"Oh my gosh, her skin's so wrinkly."
Yeah.
Like she said that stuff, right? And
Yeah.
I'm like, "Wow, like she's really trying to understand everything."
Mhm.
And it's and then and so I was happy that we brought the kids, right?
Yeah.
And they're always going to remember this experience because the whole family goes during this whole time to
Mhm.
see your grandma. So it's a whole thing. And they're going to remember that, oh, that one time we all went to go see this old lady, right?
Yeah.
And then I know your brother decided, who he has kids the same age as ours, and he decided to tell his kids the truth
Right.
that she is going to pass away, right?
Mhm.
And so when his son went to go see, great grandma, he was literally scared the whole time.
He was scared, and I think he's very sad because he's a huge empath. He's like this very intelligent little kid who, I don't know, like he's just so unique and special. And I think my brother and sister-in-law, they're kind of explaining to me that like he can read the room, he understands the emotions, he's analyzing everything. So I think him knowing that and then reading the room and then seeing my grandma, he was just like, oh my gosh,
Right. So
right?
he was informed that something was going to happen to her, and
Yeah.
then he's also analyzing the room, knowing that something's about to happen. But the thing is, because he's just a little boy, he doesn't know when death will happen. So he's literally scared, possibly expecting it to happen now at this moment. So he's like, "Oh, she's dying. Is she gonna die right now?" And like now he doesn't want to see her at all anymore. He wants to step outside, and like it just scares him. So it's like, how much or to what extent should we tell the kids what's going on, right? And I feel like there's no right or wrong. It's really about every kid is different.
Yes.
Like his kid will still be grateful that he saw her, and
Mm-hmm.
he's gonna be traumatized for a bit, but once he gets over that, he'll be like, "Wow, I got to see her."
Exactly.
But it's
Yeah.
like, uh, I don't know. Like I'm comfortable with what we did.
Yeah.
What your brother did, I'm comfortable with that because that's their own thing, and it's fine,
Yeah,
right?
because with some kids, I think we were able to filter it out, and Leia didn't want to ask questions about it, and so he just was in his own world, like he didn't know
Yeah.
what was going on. But he just thought we were like
Well,
visiting grandma,
he was
great grandma.
also coughing because of his asthma stuff, so
Yeah,
I
so we
kept him
kept him.
outside. I didn't want
Yeah.
him coughing in the room, and you know,
Yes. And with Leia, I think she kind of understood, but she didn't want to ask because of the sensitivity of the room. Like she would look at me and she was tearing up, and she's like, "I don't like this," you
she
know?
did cry. I
Yeah.
remember that.
Yeah, I think she was trying to hold it in, but she kind of like
Why do you think
was
she cried?
just seeing my grandma there and like not seeing her able to move on her own. Like we're all trying to adjust her, we're covering her with her blankets,
Mm.
and then she's like needing to use the restroom, but she can't, and she can't talk. We're trying to tell they're trying to tell her to open her eyes, like, oh, your grandkids and your great grandkids are here, and she's trying so hard. And
Hmm.
just I think for Leia to see that she's not able to control and do what she wants, like that, it was
Yeah.
hard to take in.
Mm.
And because like she may not have known that she was close to like passing away, but I think just seeing someone so fragile, like
Yeah.
it's kind of disheartening to see.
It was probably Leia's first time not being able to control a situation, and
Mm-hmm.
that's probably one of the things that added to her crying. Um,
Yeah, she even asked, she's like, can I go lay up there like on the bed with her?
yeah.
I'm like, I wish you could, but like
No, she can't
you
handle it.
can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, that was a really cool moment that everyone got to experience. And I'm glad we made that trip. And, a week later, your grandma did unfortunately pass away. Right.
Yeah.
So rest in peace to your grandma.
It was like a
Um,
few days.
and now we have another decision where we are back home in Vegas and we're like,
Mhm.
okay, we got to go back out for this funeral. What do we do about the kids? Do we bring the kids with us? Do they want to, like, is the funeral too much? And like now it's a whole nother thing because in this is where our cultures are different.
Mm-hmm.
You guys do this whole temple thing where the whole day you spend at the temple, you burn incense all day. There's a lot of chanting. And your mom's saying, yeah, bring the kids to the temple. And I'm like, I don't know. It's kind of too much. Right. And so, what did you think of the idea of, bringing the kids to the temple, but not the funeral?
So for the temple, so my parents, or my family, were Buddhist, right? And we're Taoist, our
It's like Taoism.
Taoism or Taoism, right? So basically, for the day before the funeral, we basically all have to be at a temple, and we're there from like my parents were there from 6 a.m. all the way until like 11 p.m. at night. So we're basically there all day. We have these disciples, right? And they're basically kind of like chanting and doing all these things. We're burning incense. We're kind of like bowing and sending our respects to my grandma. And at first, I was kind of hesitant. I was like, I don't know if I want the kids to be there because, first of all, like it's a really long day, and I remember it being exhausting. Um, and then second of all, because with my grandma, right, when we did the same thing, and
For your other grandma?
for my other grandma, and it was crazy because someone brought like a friend of theirs, and they kind of hired like a professional crier or
That's so
something.
weird.
So what she was doing basically was she's there and she's crying, she's saying all these things, and it's so hard to see and hear, and she's doing it the whole time. So we were concerned. We didn't want the kids to be exposed to that, and we didn't want them to see this
So
lady that's just crying the whole time.
when we're talking about crying, we're talking about this old lady who's bawling with
Yeah.
like tissues to wipe her tears, and it's just like, I don't know, it's the worst bawling in the world. And I was like, I have a feeling this is gonna happen again. I don't want
Mm-hmm.
the kids to be around that. I also don't want be around all of the incense and just everyone who's sad there, right?
Yeah.
And your mom was like, it's cool. And so
Yeah,
when
so because initially all of the little cousins were supposed to go, and because that's what we did when we were younger too. And that's why I was like, okay, you know what? We did do it, and it wasn't so much of like a sad situation for us because honestly, like you saw, it was kind of hard to be sad the whole time, right? But it was more so of like just being present, and like we were always there because there was no babysitters to watch all of us when we were younger, so we would always be there. That was normal for us. So I was like, okay, well, if all the cousins are gonna be there, they'll be doing their own thing and playing with each other. So at least in this type of situation, like while we're doing all of the kneeling and praying and all of that stuff, the kids can be together. But then in the end, they ended up, I think everyone had a change of heart. My cousins, they're just like, I don't know. I think they had the same conversations we did. And they're like, I think they're too young. I don't want to expose them to it. I don't think I want to bring them. And I think it was more so of like worrying that they would be a distraction with everything that's happening. Everything's so sacred, and they're like running around.
I mean, I really didn't want the kids to be there the whole time. I think like an hour or two was cool so they
Yeah.
can see that something was going on. And I really wanted them to see what goes on in their culture
Mm-hmm.
and soak that part in. But then when there's like now all of a sudden there's this lady crying like crazy, the whole place is filled with smoke from incense, and the instruments are so loud where it hurts your ears. I'm like, this is now way too much going on for the kids, you know. And so, um, I I, I was there with the kids for a couple hours, and
Mm-hmm.
then we left early while you stayed there,
Yeah.
and I'm glad they experienced just that little part. And to compare what her culture does at the temple is similar to what the American culture does with the wake. A wake is something you do, the night before the funeral or something like that, and they're at the temple the day before the funeral. So, that was kind of like the most the kids can do because I
Mm-hmm.
felt like a funeral for the kids is too much. Like, I didn't want them to be around that. I didn't want them to see someone in a casket. Like, that's super,
Yeah.
super traumatizing for
Mm-hmm.
their age. they can just ask in a few years, like, what happened to the lady, and we can say it. So, um, by that time, none of the kids went to the funeral because everyone felt the same way,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And
Because even for us as adults, it's kind of hard to see someone in a casket knowing that their body is physically there, but like there's nothing
yeah,
inside, right? So it's like, and that's when everyone cries and breaks down because you know what's going to happen next. And I think that was, I definitely think the kids were too young for that part of it. And I didn't want them to be traumatized from it.
your traditions are so wild that almost everybody there could not absorb what was going on um and let out your cries, because you guys don't get to sit there and remember all the times you had with your grandma. It was more of like, in this traditional setting, you guys are like, hey, right now we got to pray. Hey, right now we got to burn incense.
Mm-hmm.
Right now we got to burn some paper, burn some paper cars and houses. Okay, go back to praying. Hear some chanting. It's like nonstop, eventful day for 2 days. And I'm like, no one is absorbing any of these emotions right now. It's like they can't, because it's like, okay, what do we do next? What do we do now?
Yeah, because you're like
It's crazy.
honoring the person who passed away, and you're trying to like create the right passageway to make sure that you're sending them down the right path to guide them to go wherever they need to be. And you're doing all these things. We're burning luxury cars, gold, money, clothes, so that she has like an infinite amount wherever she's going, and to make sure she's taken care of. And it's crazy because like I see all these disciples and everything, and they're doing all this chanting and praying, and it was just very crazy to see because like my grandpa used to do that, and he was like the main disciple leading all these people, and now it's like seeing him just sitting there like grieving my grandma, and not seeing him just being too old and not being able to do it anymore.
Mm.
Like it was just a lot. And I think the way that we approached the situation and how we kind of filtered certain things for the kids to see and experience, I think that worked better for us.
Do you have any regrets not bringing the kids to the funeral?
I don't think so because I felt like I think I was okay with them just being at the temple, because now it's like, okay, well, last time you guys saw grandma, and this is why, because she was sick and we just wanted to say bye to her
Right.
before she passed. And now the second thing is, okay, well, now she passed, so we're just all here paying our respects again, and we're going to send her up to heaven, right?
Yeah. So here's my experience. When I got to see my great grandma in a hospital bed, I was, now I'm happy that I got to see her. I never went to her funeral because I was probably too young. And so I have um, no bad or negative feelings towards my parents for not taking me to that funeral. Like,
Yeah.
I'm okay with it. I'm happy that I got to see her at least once, right? Um, but I also have a cousin who passed away when he was like 13, and I was probably between 6 and 8.
Mm.
And I used to play with him all the time. And I didn't go to his funeral. I didn't know that he passed or none of that
Oh,
stuff.
wow.
And so, now at this age, I'm a little bit upset with that. I'm like, how come I was never at his funeral? How come you guys didn't tell me anything about it? It was just like he's gone, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the difference is because he was a kid and I was a kid, and I wasn't there to see him at the end of his days or after he passed. You know what I mean? So it's like I'm a little bit sad about that, where there is a hole there, you know. But I think if it was someone who was older, I wouldn't have that hole too much. I
Mm.
think it's just because I used to play with my cousin and I didn't get to see him at his funeral. I get it. I was too young. I was a 6 year old or 8 year old.
Yeah.
I wouldn't understand it, or I would be a distraction. I get that. But it does suck at this age when I think about it. So every time I go visit him at the cemetery, I'm just like, damn, dude. I never really got. My only memory is playing with him in our room.
Maybe that's the last memory that your parents wanted you to have, right? Rather than like,
Which
oh,
is
you
great.
seeing him in his casket and getting buried and all these other things. Although it's like you don't get that
Yeah, I
closure.
don't have
You
closure with
don't
my
have
cousin.
closure, but maybe like you said, I don't know, they just wanted you to have that last like good memory of him.
Yeah, and I get that, but at the end of the day, now 30 years later, I can tell you that I don't have the closure. So, would I do that to my kids? I would probably do the opposite, but that's obviously if someone passed away that was at that age, within their age group.
Yeah, I mean,
It's different.
I think I would let them know at least, because you're saying you had no idea that he even like
I
passed
don't, yeah,
away.
no.
I
I
would.
would, I would just year after year. Maybe when I was like a teenager, I would ask, "Hey, what happened to my cousin?"
Mm,
And then I would keep asking every several years, and they would tell me the story, But I'm like, how come I never knew?
yeah,
Like,
I don't know. I feel like the way that our parents raised us, like they're very private and they try not to, they try to be strong and not show too much emotion when it comes to things.
yeah.
But now times are so different. And I think for us, like, I feel like we're more open with our kids and we talk to them about more than like our parents have ever talked to us about things.
I mean, there's a lot of pros and cons, right? So like, when you're a young kid, 8 and under, and there's funerals going on and stuff like that, that might give them nightmares. That might traumatize them and have bad thoughts.
Right.
Like we don't know what would happen until we tell them and there's some sort of reaction, right? So it's like, what happens when we do explain death to them, right? Like, for experience within our kids, they don't understand it really. They just say, "Oh, do they go to heaven?" Right? And they're like, "Where is heaven?" And they say it's in the sky. And that's the only extent they know of it, right? And then they also don't take death seriously, right? Because sometimes I catch them playing together, our kids, and then they're like, "Oh, I'm sick." They get like two stuffed animals and they're playing with each other and they're talking and pretending. They're like, "Oh, I'm sick. I'm gonna die. Okay, I'm gonna go to heaven now. Bye." And then they start laughing, and I'm like, "Okay, they don't know how serious it is."
Yeah, they don't understand the
They're
extent
just playing.
of it. And I think it's because we try to filter it out. Like we try to make it seem like, oh, it's like you just go up to heaven and everything is good and that's it.
But what caught me off guard was Enzo asking questions. And what he asked was, he asked this the other day, because so now they know grandma passed away, right?
This was when we were in California, right?
Yeah.
Prior to, I think it was when we were going to the temple and we're trying to prepare them, like this is what to expect.
Yeah.
Right.
So we definitely told them that grandma passed away.
She passed away, yeah.
But we didn't explain that there's a whole funeral type of thing. We're like,
Right.
we're going to the temple to pray, right? And Enzo goes, what happens to her skin?
Yeah.
He's like, does her skin stay there?
Yeah, so he was like, "Oh, is she gonna be there? Are we gonna see her?" It's like, "No, we're not gonna see her. Like, she's resting." And then he was just like, "Oh, does she still have her skin?" And I was like,
"Oh yeah, that was weird, right?"
Yeah, I was like,
That's
"Well,
such
that's
crazy
a really
thinking.
great question, like for a 4-year-old to be asking."
I think because when he sees Halloween cartoons and stuff, he sees skeletons.
Yeah.
Right. So there's probably a gap there where he can't comprehend what happened from death to bones.
Yeah, that caught me off guard. I was just like,
I was like, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's asked me that a couple of times, just like, where does the skin go?
Yeah.
So it's like they start asking a lot of different questions that you might not be ready for. And it's like, it's really great questions,
Yeah.
Were there some other questions that Leia asked you? There were some.
I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember.
I mean, we actually we kind of found ways to introduce death to the kids at a very young age. And I did it purposely because I've been through so much death ever since I was a little one, I've been to, I don't know, over 20 some funerals of my lifetime. Right before I turned 18, I was probably at already 18 funerals. But when Leia was like 2 years old, we already introduced it to her by buying her a little fish.
Through pets, yeah.
And like there are fishes from that we win at the carnival or the fair, right? And I'm like, this guy's gonna last a week, And I'm like, all right, well, this is a good way to introduce what's gonna happen, And the reason why is because I want them to understand the life cycle, and also that if they do something to hurt themselves, life will end, right?
Yeah.
And so we started off with the little fish, and we've actually went from like one fish to like 30
A
fishes,
lot of
right?
fish. Yeah.
And the fishes pass away, and we go flush them down the toilet, which I found out that we shouldn't do anymore, right? Um, and does she understand what happens? She just understands that she will never ever see that fish again,
Yeah.
right? But then we buy another fish. She's like, "Oh, okay."
I think that's the difference when it comes to pets, though, because it's like, well, they get replaced by like new fishes and other
Right.
things, and it's kind of forgotten, right? But they're also so young and so innocent that like it doesn't affect them the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's I think that was a great way to introduce the life cycle to
Yeah.
her.
Instead of trying to filter it all out and then just like completely hide what death is. But then it's like once you expose them to that, there's always the questions and the fear. And this is how I was growing up, and I don't know where it came from. Maybe it was after like my great grandma passed away, but I would always just have these thoughts, and I would be laying in bed and I'm like just praying, right? Like, oh, just let my parents like live a really long time. Please don't let them die like ever, you know?
Yeah.
And that would make me so sad. And then I started realizing that because our kids have had talks to us about death, like that that's what Leia thinks about, because it's like, oh, well, I don't like, I want you here with me forever. I don't ever want you to die.
Yeah, she does say that to us.
Yeah. And it's like, and, I want to live with you forever and take you everywhere you want to go and like buy all these things for you and do all this stuff for you. So it's like just knowing that like it's gonna happen eventually. I think that's what scares her. So I think maybe with your parents trying to keep your cousins passing away from you is more so because of that age. So then maybe you might have that fear of like, oh my gosh, like he passed away so young, I could die at any given moment. You know what I mean? So it's like them being so young and letting them live their life thinking that like, oh, I could be next. Like you don't want them to have to live with that. Yeah.
Sometimes we tell the kids, like, when we're crossing the street, watch for cars.
Oh my gosh.
You don't want to get hit by a car because you're gonna have to go to the hospital. And then Enzo goes, "Why? Because we're gonna die." You know, and I'm like,
when he does
I'm like,
that.
I'm like,
He just has
yes.
so much,
You know?
and I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah, I'm like, yes, you will die.
Damn,
You
like,
will die.
It's so
you know?
deep. Yeah, so dark.
So there's a lot of times when I'm like, what are some other things we do? Like, oh, we'll go hiking. And I'm like, hey, guys, you got to stay close to us. And you got to hold our hands when we are on the edge of the cliff because you can't fall down the mountain. And he goes, why? Because we're going to die. And I'm like, yes.
He says that way too
or you're
much.
going to go to the hospital. And
Yeah.
you don't want that. And he's like, okay.
Yeah.
So he understands to not do things because he doesn't want to die. But he doesn't know to the extent of what die means.
Right. Yeah.
But at least he understands, like, whoa, there's a line there that we don't want to cross.
Basically.
Right.
Yep.
Which is great. All right. So I was Googling what is the age appropriate ways to discuss death with the kids. And so there's different ways to discuss with the kids at different age groups, right? So like for toddlers and young kids, it says using simple, concrete language, like, for example, the body stops working, right? And that's easy for a little kid to understand.
Yeah.
And then now for school age children, it's answering questions honestly and helping them process the emotions that they would feel, and by storytelling and things like that. So Leia is a school age kid where she had emotions come out,
Right.
right? And then we had to explain stuff. And then for teens, it's acknowledging that they have a ability to understand more complex emotions. And now they also understand the difference with spiritual things, and different aspects of death. So as they get older, it gets more complicated, and you can explain those things to them, and which is great, right? So there's different levels of explaining death to kids. But one of the best ways I know is always in the Asian culture, this is crazy, right? They don't talk about the person after death. My grandma, when my cousin passed away, my grandma, in all the pictures that we've had, he would cut him out of
Oh
the
my
picture.
gosh.
So
That
there is
is.
no more memory, you know? And so I'm just like, what the hell? Like at the young age, I wasn't like, why is she doing that type of thing, and or get mad at her. It was just more of like, oh, this is normal. This is what you do, right? But then like nowadays, what people do is they actually honor the memories, right? They talk about, well, your grandma used to do this. Here's
Mm-hmm.
something that your grandma used to have. You can have it. And they always talk about the stories of the people that passed away, which I think is the best thing to do with the kids.
Yeah, my parents do that. I don't think I know anyone that cuts out pictures of people that passed away.
I
This
don't
is
know.
kind of crazy to me. But I guess it's more of like some people just handle death differently. So maybe she didn't want people to ask about it and then have to talk about it, right? Some people just try to erase it out of their memory, I
Yeah.
guess. But I don't think that's the right way of doing it, especially when we have kids. I think for a lot of people, it's kind of hard for them to openly grieve about stuff and talk to their kids about things. So I know that they make a lot of books that kind of talk about death and like what to expect and stuff like that. And they kind
Yeah.
of like sugarcoat it in a way where it's like you get them to understand, but also letting them know that their feelings are valid and it's okay to be sad, but like to a certain extent.
I feel like there's always going to be levels of explaining death to kids, no matter how old you are.
Yeah.
Like, just now at this age, my dad talks about his death to me little by little,
Mm.
which is crazy. You know what I mean? He's like, just the other day, he was driving us to the airport and he's like, you know, um, he's talking about him and my mom and that he's going to go before my mom because he says that his DNA is not as good,
Oh, I know. I
right?
remember when he said that, and I was like,
He's like, so this will be for your mom when I pass. This will be there. These are the things
yeah,
that we'll do. He's like, this is the type of funeral I'm gonna have, and I'm like, what? How do you know you're gonna pass before mom? He's like, well, my DNA is not as good,
yeah.
right? His dad passed away in his 40s. His grandpa passed away in his 70s.
Mm-hmm.
My dad is in his 70s. So he's like, I don't have much longer, based off what he's seen in his timeline, right?
Yeah.
With his
So
parents.
he's like trying to prepare his kids for.
Pretty much. So it's like he's telling me only a certain extent of things. He's not going all out, and I don't know.
So basically, it's like as a parent, you're gonna be dealing with this kind of communication about death and life, like your
Yeah.
whole life
So like
until you pass.
I took it as a good chance to ask my dad, like, hey, do you want a normal funeral,
Yeah.
or do you want one of those traditional ones with all those monks and disciples and chanting and burning paper and stuff? And he's like, yeah, if you can do that, I would want that.
Mm.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
all right, well, how? He's like, mom should know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right. Like,
Yeah, and
I,
I had this conversation with my mom too just yesterday. I'm like, hey, like you need to let us know. Like that was a lot that we had
yeah.
to take in, and also my brothers and sisters aren't as religious as you guys are. So you need to let us know how sacred it is to you, what you want us to remember, and who we need to go to. Like
It's pretty much who do we contact
exactly.
and get the right people
Yeah, you
for
let us
for
know.
these traditional rituals, right?
Yeah. Not
Um,
not saying that it's gonna be happening anytime soon, but like, hey, let us know so we can
I
be
just
ready to
I,
honor you the way
right.
you want.
We just want to do things properly.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Asian culture is crazy, man. Like we don't understand any of that stuff and don't know who to talk to about it when things happen, and it gets very, very complicated. You know, and if you guys are not Asian or the ones that are, you guys understand the significance of burning paper. So like when you burn fake money, burn fake cars and clothes, it goes to the afterlife of that person and they somehow receive it and they're happy, right? And so I asked my dad, I was like, I just wanted to know what would make him happy. And I was like, hey, since you want this traditional stuff, you want me to burn you a new car every year? Because I know my dad loves cars.
Yeah.
He literally gets a new car every couple years and he loves driving. He's a car guy. And I'm like, I'll burn you a new car every year. And I'm like, do you care? He's like, I don't care. Like it doesn't mean anything to me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, like I thought he'd be happy if I burned him a new car every year.
I think because to people, it's like once you accept death, you're like, it doesn't matter in the afterlife. You can burn all these things for me, but does it matter? I think it's more of what you're doing right after they pass and that whole like time frame.
Yeah, I think he accepted that he's gonna be happy no matter what.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why he's like, I don't care what you burn. You
Yeah,
know.
because I think with our parents, they don't even want us to get to the extent of what we're doing now for other people because they see how much they have to do,
Yeah,
right?
it's crazy, man. Asian culture with death is insane. Every family is so different with what they got to do after death. You
Yeah,
know.
I think with any culture though, so it's like the lesson learned here is to talk to your parents and as scary of a thought that and conversation that it is, like have that conversation to know like how you can honor your parents and how you can like send them away respectfully when the time comes, because you don't want to be shocked, you're grieving, and then you don't want to deal with all those emotions, and then like, oh my gosh, like what do we do? How would they want us to, like, do they want us to bury them? Do they want us to
You know,
cremate them? Where are they going to get buried? Like all these things is just too much.
the conversation that I actually want to have with my parents is a sit down and ask them everything and write it down. But it's like, I don't want to be insensitive to the situation and to them and to their thoughts, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to scare them, but at the same time, like, I want to write all this shit down and ask them everything. So it's like, when is there ever a time to do that?
I
What I
think
mean?
maybe because it's such a dark subject that it's not like having a serious sit down and like trying to take notes and ask them all these like invasive questions, because I don't think anyone wants to think about
I
death.
would do that with you guys. I
I
think as I get older, I'm gonna be like, yo, let's just sit down and I'll tell you everything that I want. This is where I want to be. This is what I want. This is what I want to do. This is what you guys should do.
Yeah, I mean, like it depends on the situation and the tone, and like if you're like getting to that point and you're sick and you know like something is going to happen, then it's like, yes, I think that's appropriate. But like with my parents, for example, like I will casually ask things here and there and I'll make notes of it, but I'm not like, okay, let's have this serious sit down and talk about things because they're healthy right
You
now.
don't think it's appropriate?
I think it's too dark because I don't want to put that
But what if
out there.
what if oh, I see. So like, if I want to have the conversation with you guys for myself,
Yeah.
you would probably, it's almost like manifesting things,
Yeah,
which
and
we don't
it's
want.
just different because it's like you're already kind of preparing for it, but like in a very serious manner. And for me, I try to avoid that unless it's like life or death
But what's
situation.
the difference if we had a will, a trust, a beneficiaries, all those things set up? Isn't that writing it all down too?
Yeah, but you're planning for the future and protecting the family and the kids and trying to designate where things go to make the
But it,
transition easier. I wouldn't say it's manifesting, but I think it's like
but it's still like writing down what happens and also what to do during funeral phases.
yeah, but I think trying to like have a meeting to write down everything and talk about it is kind of like too it's too it feels too deep and dark already. So I'll ask my mom here and there, and for her, she's like, I just asked her yesterday after we were talking because I was checking in on them, and she's like, "Oh well, I already got my plots. I'm gonna go find my own caskets, and I'm gonna have all these things already like paid for and taken care of. So when my time is here, then you don't have to do as much."
Right.
So it's like trying to kind of casually talk about these things, but also already knowing and maybe taking mental notes or writing stuff down, but not like, oh, let's meet so we can talk about
You know,
what to do when you're gonna die.
I don't know if this is
I don't
dark,
know.
but I'm a little bit excited to go plot shopping.
I'm not. When you ask me about it, I'm like,
It's
want
like
to.
the reason why I'm excited is because
you're so weird.
for the last 20 years, my parents have said, you know, we got some plots as a family. We bought them, and you know, they would take me to the site, and they'd be like, "You like it?" You know, and things like that. I'm like, honestly, I don't know if I want to be next to you. You know, I want to be with my wife and my kids, but at the same time, like that's how they're thinking. They want to be with their kids,
Yeah,
right?
because that's how their
And
parents have done it too.
and that's how it usually is.
Yeah.
But like, you know, when I see other plots and I'm like, oh wow, this one has a nice view of the entire LA County and all this stuff, and like there's waterfalls and lakes and ponds, and
Yeah.
I'm like, it's kind of cool to see what you would like for the rest of your afterlife type of
Ouch.
thing.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm like, I kind of want to go shopping.
I mean, I'm not excited or thrilled about it. Like, if it came down to having to see what the options are, yes, but I'm not gonna say like, woo.
No,
Like,
that's
we're
not what I
house
meant.
shopping. You know?
I just meant that because I've seen certain sites already that were bought for me where I'm like, I don't like those spots.
Yeah.
It's not a safe spot. It's a very busy area. You know, it's
I think
just weird, right? So
you've
I'm
just
just
been
like,
around it so much that you know, like, this is heavy foot traffic. People are gonna be walking over me, and this is where
right,
everyone is. And
exactly.
so I get it.
And for people to go from where the car is parked to me is a really difficult walk that I
Yeah.
don't want people to do. You're gonna be stepping over everyone's headstones to get to
Yeah.
me, and I'm like, no, like I'm not happy with that.
Right.
I want to find something easy for people to come visit me and stuff like that. So it's like I want to find a happy place, you know,
Yeah.
for everybody. And so I don't know. I've just been through a lot that I don't even know how to say it. You know, I'm weird like that.
You're numb to it, I think, almost.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. This is a crazy episode, guys, and I should have said trigger warning in the very beginning, but you know, this was all like things that are uncomfortable to talk about in the Asian culture, and here we are, the new generation, trying to share with you our experiences and what we go through, and it's so relatable in the Asian culture. And I hope you guys sat through this entire episode and listened to it, and if you did, we appreciate you guys. So if you guys enjoyed it, please subscribe and follow us on all podcast platforms: Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Amazon, and TikTok. And we'll catch you guys next time.
Did you say Amazon and
Oh,
TikTok?
I did, huh? My bad. I meant Instagram.
Instagram and TikTok.
Amazon and
I
TikTok.
was like, Amazon.
Yeah, but Amazon has Amazon Music where you can listen to the
Right.
podcast. So
Yeah.
shout out to you guys that use Amazon Music. And we'll see you guys next time on Love and Rice.